Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mama Jack. Today, we're talking about NICU stays, and I have a guest. But before I get to my guest, I wanted to talk about my journey with NICU stays. My son Kennedy was in the NICU for 3 or 4 days. I believe it was 4 days, 3 days. Anyways, it was pretty traumatizing for me. So, he came out and he had gurgling in his lungs. So when he was breathing, he was gurgling a little bit. So that means fluid in his lungs. So they took him off to the NICU. They, took my epidural out. They got me cleaned up. They sent me to the recovery room, and it had been about like 2 hours and I still hadn't seen him. And finally, I called the nurse and I'm like, can I go see my kid? And my husband went with him. So I was on my own for these 2 hours, just thinking, like, what the heck is going on? Like, nobody gave me an update. It was really weird. So I get to the NICU and he's attached to everything. He had a feeding tube, he had oxygen, and nobody prepared me for what I was about to walk into. It was like, you're so excited about giving birth. It was my first. He seemed completely fine other than that, and it was pretty scary to see. He was taking formula at first, and then once my milk supply came up more, they would give him my colostrum as much as I could give, and then we would give him formula. So I ended up pumping with him. So once my milk came in, it was all breast milk, but it was a short stay. It was about, like I said, 4 days, I think, 3 days, 4 days. We had to go home, and there was a night without him, and I remember it was, like, 10 p.m., and the nurse was like, "Please go home and sleep," and I was like, "I just really wanna stay here," and she's like, "No, honey, go get some rest," and I'm thinking in my head, like, "I'm waking up every 2 hours to pump. I'm not gonna rest." So he actually came early. He came at 37 weeks. So we weren't really ready in our place. So we frantically went home, did all the things, organized the diapers, everything we could or what we thought we needed. And, the next day we go to pick him up. He did the little car seat test and everything ended up being fine. Seeing your baby like that is pretty scary, and it killed me inside. I know it was something very simple compared to what other mothers experience in the NICU, but I don't think any prepare you for that moment when you see this little being that you just made hooked up to all of these machines. It was pretty crazy. So, that made paranoia when he came home even worse, of course, because you have a newborn and it's like you're already paranoid and like, "Can I do this? Oh my god, this is so overwhelming." Like, he's waking up at this time and, he had a bottle of formula and he was drinking from a bottle in the NICU and I was trying to breastfeed, so that made it even harder, but we'll go into that in another episode. Point being, short NICU stay affected my heart so much. I remember seeing him for the first time and just crying so hard, and you can't hold them. I couldn't hold him. I could put my hand in a little hole. I got to hold him when he first came out, but it was so scary. And my guest has a story, but it's a lot more in depth than mine. And my heart goes out to all the NICU mamas because it's tough. It's tough to see your little one like that. And of course, when I was in the hospital, I was there every second I could be. So I would pump throughout the night. After I pumped in my room, I'd take it over to the NICU and I'd feed him myself. My husband stayed with me and he would come sometimes, but I let him sleep through the night because one of us had to be, coherent. And it was it was a tough way to start. I'll just say that. So for all you mamas, I'm with you. My love is with you and my heart is with you because even those couple days and going home and not having my baby, even for that one night, like killed me inside. So let's start with Brittany's journey. I call her Superwoman Mama, and you'll see why. So I got Brittany on the line. Brittany is a mother of 9. Yes, you heard me correctly. 9 kids, 6 that she actually birthed, and then 3 bonus children. Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
So, we are here today to talk about your pregnancy with your triplets. She has triplets, everybody. Yep, that's the last 3. And to talk about their NICU stay. So, first of all, how are you doing today?
I am doing as good as I can be doing.
I know. All those kids drive you nuts, and you're a working mom. This girl's superwoman here. So, Brittany's a friend of mine. So, from what I understand, you had a tubal ligation before you and your husband decided to have another baby, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you had to go through, was it in vitro?
Yes, IVF.
You went through your IVF, and tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, IVF in general was such an emotional experience in itself. A lot goes with it. And if anyone's ever done IVF, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So many hit or misses. Nothing ever goes as planned. I'm not going to go in depth on how IVF worked, but we did egg retrieval and they chose the best of our eggs and the best of my husband's sperm and made cute little embryos for us, in which only 4 survived. So we actually decided to take a poll on Facebook and see how many embryos we should transfer, 1 or 2. And everyone was saying 2, and we were like, okay, we'll do 2 because it is quite the expensive journey. We definitely wanted at least 1 baby out of everything. So 2 was implanted, and then we ended up with 3.
So did you go back to Facebook and start a GoFundMe for your triplets on the way?
I definitely should have. I can remember the shock still today that we were in. So our very first ultrasound, after we got the phone call that my HCG levels were through the roof at 4 weeks, and they ended up doing an ultrasound, and they only seen 2 at first. We clearly seen 2 at first, 2 different sacs. There was definitely 2 babies, and we were like, okay, twins, not a shock there. We implanted 2 embryos. So kind of what we were expecting. We were fine with it. And my husband jokingly says, are you sure that there isn't any more? And I blame him because the nurse was like, well, I can double check. So she did. She double checked, and behold, there were 3 beating hearts.
Oh my God. Did he pass out? What did you got? What was running through your head at that moment? That's insane.
So I can't tell you what he was feeling, only I know he kept saying, are you sure? Like, is this real life? Are you lying to us? Is this a prank? And believe it or not, the thoughts that were running through my head at that time was, I've only got 2 boobs. How am I supposed to breastfeed 3 babies with 2 boobs? I was so just distraught that I only had 2 boobs for 3 babies. So that was my initial thought in the beginning, was, how am I going to breastfeed 3 babies? I really want to breastfeed. And then I don't think it really hit me until I gave birth that there were 3 babies.
Yeah. I don't think it really hits anybody that they're like obviously you're having a baby, right? Because you're pregnant and you can feel them inside. But like until you see them, that's like the oh shit moment where you're like, oh my, okay, there's another one. Here's another one.
Yep.
So pregnancy wise, how did that look different than your other pregnancies?
Oh, it was so much. So I feel like with my other 3 pregnancies, I wasn't as anxious. I knew that there was 1 baby, and I always had faith that all 3 babies were going to come out successful on their own in each individual pregnancy. So it was, singletons was a breeze anxiety wise. And then with the 3, all at once, there was so much anxiety every single night that I went to bed. I was so worried that one wasn't going to make it. I had several scares in my pregnancy with bleeding, and just any worst thought that you can have is just constantly running through your head. And all you want is a viable pregnancy with all three babies to be healthy. And so it was so, I don't even have words to explain. It felt like I was living in a hell that I could not wake up from, because I was so terrified every night. I was terrified to move the wrong way, or, what happens if I accidentally slip and fall, like even early on in the pregnancy. It was just so nerve-wracking, not knowing and not being able to see or hear the heartbeats 24/7, knowing that they're okay, and just all the scares that come with it. When you have more than one baby, not so much with twins, but with triplets and beyond, high-risk doctors are very encouraging in terms of reducing your pregnancy. I shouldn't say they don't like, but what it made me feel like when I had my first high-risk doctor appointment was that they didn't want me to have all three of these babies, because they kept pushing and kept pushing to do a reduction and to take one of the babies' lives so that it could be a more safe pregnancy for me and the other two. And that was gut-wrenching. Like, I couldn't even fathom taking one of my babies from me, not knowing, what they ever look like. And it really hurts when you have a doctor encouraging you to do that. But
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
yeah.
So how long, I know with like twins, you have, a certain amount of weeks that you're expected to get to. With triplets, what is the average weeks that they're trying to get you to?
So the average is 34 to 36 weeks.
Okay. And how long did you make it?
26 weeks.
Okay, so before that, were you having complications? Like, what was going on?
I was perfectly fine until I hit 25 weeks. I went in and I discovered that I had cholestasis. And of course, I had gestational diabetes as well and was on insulin. But other than that, it was a pretty healthy pregnancy, other than the gestational diabetes and the cholestasis.
What's cholestasis?
Oh, man, I am not a doctor, but I can tell you what it did to me. It made me so itchy. I was clawing at my arms and my legs just 24/7. I was making myself bleed from scratching so much. And they say it's where it's like your liver shutting down.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know how much it is for one baby to take a toll on your body, let alone three. I can't imagine that. Were you nauseous the whole time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that just never settled at all.
Nope.
Yeah, I could imagine. So, was it a planned? Did you end up having a C-section? Yeah.
Yeah, I did end up having a C-section. So I started preterm labor. I was at Huddle House having instant contractions, 2 minutes apart, horrible pain in my back. Went to the hospital and they were actually going to send me home because they said that I wasn't going to have the babies. However, that night, I asked if they would keep me. They were going to bring me pain medicine as soon as my husband came back. He had ran to Walmart to get some food for me because I can't take pain medicine if I don't eat. But he went to go get food, and the next thing I know, I went to go to the bathroom, felt a lot of pressure, thought I had to use the restroom. When I reached down there, because I felt something coming out, it was Elena. Sack and all, she was entering the world whether we wanted her to or not.
Oh
And
my God, she started so young. Okay, so me and Brittany are really good friends, and little Elena she's like a little whippersnapper. She's
she's a
she's
bombshell.
already started. Coming out, she was already a troublemaker.
Yep, that's Elena.
Okay, so what happened after that? What did they do?
So I started pulling all the nurses' lines and hitting all the buttons, and nurses came in there and thought I was going crazy. And I said, no, this baby is coming out of me. And she looked down and she said, nope, you're right. So they flipped me upside down on my bed. My husband had just walked in the door. He had no idea what was going on. And then they were like, well, she's going to have these babies today. So they rushed me to the delivery room. I was awake during the whole thing. There was probably about 25 doctors and nurses in the room. And I remember hearing little Elena cry the first time. And I heard Mac cry the first time. Hudson, unfortunately, we did not hear cry. They put Elena at my face, but they told us that due to how underdeveloped they were and how little they were going to have to put them in a little bag to keep their heat and take them straight to the NICU. And so my husband took some pictures for me, and I can see where they were working on Hudson, and do not believe he was breathing whenever he was born. They had to perform CPR to get him to breathe, but luckily he's a fighter, and he started making it. And then they were all three rushed into the NICU.
Oh my goodness. Like, I can't imagine what it's like after, Kennedy was in the NICU for a little bit and he had a little bit of gurgling, which meant like fluid in his lungs. And just feeling that feeling like with one kid, and he did not have a long NICU stay at all. I believe it was like 3 or 4 days. So, like, I cannot imagine how it must have felt with three of these little ones that you were just like, first of all, it's like for, a mom, whenever your baby just gets taken from you like that, even though they're in the NICU, like they're in safe hands, there's like no way to describe that feeling. Like for me, it was like, where's my baby? Where's my baby? Like I was in
Yeah.
panic mode. Like, how did you feel after that?
Yeah, that is, I mean, I feel like when they took them back, I was okay. I had been through the NICU journey before with my oldest son, Jaden. He was in the NICU for 2 weeks. So I kind of knew what to expect in the beginning. It didn't really start getting hard for me until I couldn't hold them immediately. Because with Jaden, I was able to hold him as soon as I was out of the delivery room and finished recovering. With the triplets, I actually didn't get to hold any of them for quite some time. Elena, I had to wait 2 weeks. Hudson, I waited 3 weeks. And Mac was 2 months old before I could hold him.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So, were all three babies kept at the same hospital?
So we had a scare with Mac. Elena and Hudson stayed at one hospital. Mac was shipped to, I say shipped, but he was transported. He was transported to a children's hospital because he had to have some emergency care done. They thought he had air around his heart, which he did, and it could instantly kill a baby if not taken care of immediately. So they transported him to a different hospital the very next day. And I think that is when my anxiety really kicked in. It was so hard not being there, not being able to see him settled in. I know I remember sending my husband to that hospital while I was still recovering and able to stay with the other two. I'm going to cry.
Oh.
I remember not knowing if he was okay. Because he was just our little sickling. And as a mom, when your baby gets separated from you at a completely different hospital and you can't be there to console them, it was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to deal with in my whole entire life.
Did you bounce back between hospitals? Like, how long were you, I don't remember, were you working right before? Did you have to take time off of work?
So I was working. I was able to take 12 weeks off. And during that time, I was hopping between the two different hospitals. We were going every single day to both hospitals multiple times a day when my older children were in school. So, or whenever they were at their other parents' house, that's whenever we would spend pretty much all day at both hospitals. There was times whenever I started feeling really guilty because I would leave even whenever my older children were home. I would go to the hospital and I felt like they never seen me during our NICU journey.
Well, how many days were they all in there?
So Elena was in the NICU for 114 days. Hudson was in the NICU for 136, and Mac was in there for 137.
Oh my goodness. Did you sleep there ever, or did you just go home at the end of the night and that was that? Like,
Yeah, so they wouldn't let me sleep there. And both hospitals were about 45 minutes from my house. And I believe I was there so much during the times that I could be there during visiting hours because I was trying to breastfeed and I was pumping and having to constantly deliver milk to both hospitals back and forth. So there were times when I would go in from 6 o'clock in the morning, leave at 2, and then go back 7 p.m. at night and leave at 2 a.m. in the morning.
oh my goodness. It's like, why wouldn't they just let you stay at that point? I know they didn't let me stay in the NICU either. They literally had to like pull me away. And it was funny because they're like, go home and get some rest. I'm like, first of all, I have to pump every 2 hours.
Yeah.
Secondly, like, get rest. My baby is away from me. Like,
Yep.
you must not have a baby, because like that first couple like days, months, it's like you physically feel something when you can't be with your baby, like you physically feel something when you can't be with that child. So let's talk about Elena and her NICU stay. Was it just, at the beginning, what were the issues? What did she have to go through during that journey?
Oh, there was so many issues. I mean, when they were born, their skin was translucent because they were so underdeveloped. So it was really just her lungs were underdeveloped. She was on the ventilator. She then moved to CPAP and then the regular oxygen O2 in her nose. And then it was feeding, getting her to eat. But once she was able to eat, she would be able to come home. So she caught on fairly quickly. She didn't have a lot of mishaps. She didn't have to go back on the ventilator multiple times. So she was the easier one of the three.
Mm-hmm. So did they basically make them all stay until it would have been the correct gestational time for them to be born? Was that kind of it, or was it just based off of the issues they were having?
So it was based off the issues they were having, but they did tell us, if things are going well at their expected due date, they would more than likely get to come home. And I think that's one of the things as a parent that we're told to kind of keep our hopes up. But I'm going to tell you, I was told, expect June 17th, expect June 17th. Like they're going to come home June 17th. And it never happened. June 17th came around and I was just disappointed time and time again. Every single day, it was always something else, they need to be here a little bit longer. So they actually didn't come home until August. All of them eventually came home around the end of August, which was when they were 4 months old already.
Oh my goodness. That's nuts. So, what about Hudson?
So Hudson, he had a lot of lung issues. He was on the ventilator, switched over to CPAP, and then back on the ventilator, then back on CPAP, and then back on the ventilator. And then eventually, he was able to push through and was on CPAP. And he had some major issues with his heart rhythm. So they had to end up putting him on a medication to slow down his heart rate because it was over the 200s. And then once that was settled and he would eat fairly well, then he was able to come home.
Did any of the issues carry on after they got back? Was Hudson on a feeding tube as well, or were all three of them on feeding tubes?
So all three of them were on feeding tubes from the very beginning. Just the tube that went down the throat,
Mm-hmm.
or up either in the mouth down the throat or up the nose down the throat. But Mac was the only one that was brought home on a feeding tube. He ended up getting a Mickey button, which is a G tube directly into the stomach.
Okay, so Mac, when he was in the hospital, what was going on with him? And tell us about, what happened with him. Do they believe, because he has cerebral palsy, do they believe it was from birth, or what did they tell you about that?
So when all the babies were first born, they They all had an extensive workup. They did head scans. Everything was fine with all of them to an extent. I believe what really happened is during the transport between hospitals, he was just so underdeveloped, and any little bump that they hit could have caused brain damage. I don't know if that's what's happened, but honestly, everything was fine before he went to that hospital. So something along the lines there happened, and he did end up getting a brain bleed. He had a grade 4 brain bleed on his right side and a grade 2 on his left side. Grade 4 is the highest brain bleed you can have. And when they told me that news, I was like, well, what does that mean exactly? He was very, very sick for the longest time. He ended up getting staph in his bloodstream. There was times when we walked in and I just knew if I left, he wasn't going to be alive when I came back. But he fought through all odds. I mean, he had to have several blood transfusions, several platelet transfusions, was on the ventilator the longest. He was on the ventilator for the first 3 months of his life. They didn't diagnose him with cerebral palsy until he was actually a year old. So they didn't know about that. All they knew was that his brain had suffered some severe brain damage from the brain bleed, and we didn't know what that would look like. He ended up developing hydrocephalus, and they had to put in a brain shunt to drain all of the fluid off of his brain.
Oh my goodness. That is so, I just can't imagine going through all, like, how strong you are, right? Like, do you realize that? Because
Oh,
most people would not be able to handle all of that. Like, you are a strong, strong woman. I have to tell you. I've always thought that about you. But honestly, that is just like I said, you're superwoman. You're the superwoman. Having the three in the NICU, emotionally, like, were you just in survival mode, do you think? Or were you able to process things? What was going on with you during this time, especially when you would go home and you couldn't stay the night with your babies?
oh my goodness. So I know for the first month, I feel like I was in survival mode. I didn't really let my emotions hit me. And one of the things I will say is the hospital that Mac was at, they did not have cameras. The hospital that Elena and Hudson was at, they did have cameras. So I could watch my babies 24/7 if I wanted to. So that helped a little bit. But I remember one of the most vivid images in my head when I look back at that time was I remember going into the nursery one night and just grabbing their blankets and squalling my eyes out, going through clothes that they wouldn't be able to wear right now, and just crying because I wasn't there. And I felt like I was never going to get my babies home. And I did this probably, I want to say, once a week after the first month. And my husband would come in there and he'd be like, "Are you okay?" And like, "No, I don't have my babies." And he did his best to console me, but he also knew to just kind of let me work out my emotions on my own. He he was my biggest supporter with my emotions, but I will say it was so much. It was just so much heartbreak and not knowing, not being able to see Mac like I could see the other two, and not knowing if everything was okay. I think I called the hospital at least 10 times a day, every single day, whenever I wasn't there. They definitely knew me by name.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I remember seeing all the other mothers and fathers in the NICU when we were there for our short amount of time, and you could tell a lot of them were twins, and they were, the parents just had their routine. They
Yeah.
just came in, they did their thing, they stayed with their babies. Did you have to go back to work before they were out?
Yes. Yes, I did. Luckily, I was able to work remotely. And so that really helped my situation a lot. I couldn't imagine being in a job that didn't allow you to just, leave whenever you needed to. My supervisor was always very understanding and told me, anytime I needed to go to the NICU to feed the babies or drop anything off, to please feel free to go. So I was able to go on my lunch breaks every day, working an 8 to 5 job. So I would go on my lunch breaks for an hour and spend time at one hospital, and then when I got off work, I would go to the other hospital and spend time with the other baby or babies that I didn't see on my lunch break.
Then they come home. So, like, at first you have two babies in one hospital, one baby in another. Then you have one baby at home, one in a hospital, and one in another.
Yeah. Yeah, that was probably when it started getting extremely hard to manage because, again, I was breastfeeding and I was pumping, and Elena was strictly on the breast at first. And so it got really hard when she came home because I couldn't go to the hospital every single day, multiple times a day like I used to. I could only go every other day, and it was normally a short hour gap that I was able to spend at each hospital. Whatever hospital I didn't get to go to, my husband would go to the other one. That way each baby had one of us there every single night. But it was so hard not being able to see the boys every single day, multiple times a day like I was.
That is just nuts. And then, so you got used to one baby at home, and then the other one came home. Were there any special needs that they had when they were just getting out of the hospital, or by that time were they on bottle or breast and you didn't have to like worry about those two because they were the first two that came home?
So the first two, so Elena and Hudson, when they came home, it was really just like having your newborn baby at home. Other than, they did have some specialists that they had to see quite frequently, but for at-home care, it was just like taking care of a newborn baby.
Yeah. But when Mac came home, he had a little more to adjust to, right?
Oh yeah. So Mac, we had to train on his oxygen before he could actually come home. So he was on oxygen when he came home for the first 2 months. So he actually didn't have to stay on it too long, but for 8 weeks he was at home with oxygen. And then we had his feeding tube. Luckily, I have another son, Rylan, who had a feeding tube for the first 6 years of his life. And it was the same feeding tube that Mac had. So I was already fairly experienced with that, which was definitely a plus. So it was a lot. It was a lot to juggle, especially when we'd have to go out with all three babies and we'd have to have Mac's oxygen tank. And you really start to rely on the medical supplier that gets you these things because we were out 24/7, it seemed like, to all these different doctor's appointments. And if Mac didn't have his oxygen or if our power went out, like it was just so much that went into it. The anxiety continued after they came home from the NICU for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine because with one kid, my anxiety was off the, you know, off the roof. I just can't imagine having three and sitting there. It's like with Harlow and Kennedy, I had that like, you fall asleep for 5 seconds and wake up. Are they breathing? Fall
Yeah.
asleep for 5 seconds. Like you just keep jolting yourself awake. So like you had to look three different ways. It
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
just like one baby. You were like, oh my goodness. So being a triplet mom, do you find it hard to give them all attention or do they kind of just steal it all from you?
In the beginning, when they all first came home, I thought I was going to go insane. I felt like I couldn't give them all enough attention. It was either, as soon as I fed one, I was feeding the next and feeding the next, and then the next one would start crying. It was just constantly like rotating between babies. Now that they're older, I mean, they're about to be 2 years old in March. And now that they're older, I feel like I get the perfect amount of time with each baby. I can tell you each of their personalities. I can tell you, all the little things about each one of them. And there's enough mama love to go around.
Oh, plus all your older kids. So how did they react when you brought all three of them home?
They had been patiently waiting for 4 months to finally meet their little brothers and little sister. And they were just so joyful. I remember when Elena come home, I took a recording of my boys and of my bonus kids, and they were just so excited. But every single one of them asked, "Where's the boys? Where's Mac and Hudson?" And so finally, when they come home, they were also excited. And the age gap that we have, we have all older kids, 8 and above, and so each one of them helps out as much as possible, and that is what makes it so easy for me as a triplet mom now, is because I have older kids to help. If a baby's crying, I've got kids young enough to go play with them that won't get bored, or if I need one of, like, my 17-year-old or my 11-year-old to go up there and watch them for just a little bit so I can take a 1 hour nap, so they definitely make life a little bit easier with their help.
That is so sweet. Well, I mean, good for you, girl. Good for you and Jimmy. My goodness, I cannot believe, like I said, I can't wrap my head around it because even with one kid in my short little stay, and I just remember looking at the other parents and just feeling for them because I was like, "Oh my goodness," like I cried so hard that one night that I didn't have Kennedy with me, and I feel I don't feel the intensity of it because you had to wait so long, but, like, I know what that feels like, and that is not easy, and you are a strong, strong woman. I know you are getting sick of me telling you that, but I just wanna tell you, like, honest to God, like, you are so strong, and you are such an inspiration, and your babies are beautiful.
Well,
I love
thank
them
you.
all so much, and we will most likely have another episode on Mac, right? Because we
Yes.
want to talk about him a little more.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for this. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. We covered a lot, and I'm actually impressed. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my journey and hopefully help other families and other mothers or fathers that are listening, help them see that they're not alone if they have babies in the NICU journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for being on, and I love you.
I love you.
I mean, after hearing that, your heart just melts, right? She is so inspirational. The stuff that she went through with her triplets is something that people never think would happen with their kids. Now, because she had triplets, of course, she knew there was a chance, with multiples plus, there's always a chance of that happening because normally you have them a little earlier. So they're a little, less developed. But she is just such a strong, inspirational mama, and I am so happy that I was able to give her a platform and she was able to share her story with you guys. Thank you so much for listening. As always, reach out to me if you like it. If you have any comments, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, all under the Mama Jack. I have a Facebook group and a page. So you can look for me, you can message me. I love hearing feedback and I love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening.